Does Ryan Leaf think Bryce Young is a bust? We're here on the Dan Patrick Show. I think he's a bust. I've been on record saying I think Bryce Young will go down as the next Jamarcus Russell, the next poster child of worst first overall picks as far as quarterbacks go, especially when you consider what the Panthers gave up to get Bryce Young. So Bryce Young's rookie season is over, right? And unequivocally, it was bad. The numbers are awful. We will take a look at all those numbers in this video. We'll take a look at his rookie season, and then we'll compare his rookie season with Jamarcus Russell. But I'm interested to hear what Ryan Leaf has to say, because Ryan Leaf could have been one of the biggest draft busts as far as the first overall pick if he would have gone first over Peyton Manning, but instead the Chargers took him second overall. The rest is history.
You assess what, like if you're looking at handicapping him as an analyst and a former quarterback, what would you say to Carolina fans?
I'd say usually you have to see how a player is going to react, right? When you go through adversity like that, when people are tossing the bust word at you and saying you're a failure and all those things. How are you?
True. Bryce Young will have a chance to right the wrong. He will have a chance to get better. He will have a chance to improve. A rookie season doesn't define a player. You know, Peyton Manning had a bad rookie season. He threw a lot of interceptions. He obviously figured that out. So you can bounce back. My whole thinking is that Bryce Young was so bad, he's so far behind the eight ball, that even if he dramatically increases, he still will be bad. And we'll see that when we look at the stats too. So can Bryce Young mentally, emotionally, whatever, handle the bust word and a horrible first year and the pressure that comes with that? But then physically, can he actually do the job? Can he actually be a good quarterback? We have yet to see him do that at any point in the NFL. Physically, I don't think he can do it. That's my biggest thing. I don't think emotionally, all that, I think he is the right kind of person to get through the hardships of this. I just don't think he can play the game at a level high enough for a first overall pick.
Emotionally mature enough to deal with it. And I think Bryce Young's an incredibly mature, emotional young man. I really do. So I don't have any fear in him being able to weather it and doing well and getting better in year two, regardless of who is at the helm. My only fear is the team is awful. I mean, there's no...
Let's take a look at how much better Bryce Young would have to be anywhere near average. Here we are, Bryce Young's final rookie year statistics. 59.8 completion percentage, 33rd in the NFL, 28.77 passing yards, 20th, 11 passing touchdowns, 28th, 10 picks, 62 sacks taken, second in the NFL, 33.3 QBR, 29th in the NFL, and 73.7 passer rating, 34th in the NFL, worse than every starter and two backups. Really, really, really bad stuff. I mean, if you look at this right here, this is kind of what I'm saying. Like, objectively, the stats are horrendous. If he improved by 10 rankings across the board, which would be a lot, that'd be a dramatic improvement. All of a sudden in year two, he would be 23rd in completion percentage, 10th in yards, he'd be 18th in passing touchdowns, he'd be 19th in QBR, and he'd be 24th in passer rating. Still bad, right? So if he makes the biggest jump possible, 10 whole spots across the board, he would still be way below average in almost every single statistical category.
Skill position players, they have not added to it. They would have the number one overall pick if they didn't trade it away to the Chicago Bears. So that's my bigger issue. When you get drafted first or second or third overall, you're going to a bad team, period. And you have...
That's why I've always said it's better for a quarterback to sit, because they're going into a bad situation. They're going into a bad organization. More than likely, they don't have great offensive line play. More than likely, the weapons aren't that good. More than likely, the defense isn't that good. That's why they're picking where they're picking, right? So it's hard to throw a player into that. Sometimes you do get players like CJ Stroud, who just, everything fits, everything works. They play really well individually and can lift the team. I mean, Stroud won the division. He's going to the playoffs. He's played really well on his own. So it's a little give and take. It can go both ways. I definitely err towards sitting a young player, especially someone like Bryce, who physically you're concerned about. You know, like Cam Newton, players like that, they're physically, like their physical dominance is part of, Anthony Richardson's a good example. Their physical dominance is part of why they were drafted. So it's probably better to get them in early, let them use that physicality and figure out the rest. Players like Bryce, who physically are nothing special, they probably should sit, learn the game. Thus, when they do get put in, they're progressed way further just understanding the NFL game.
To have, I would say, generational ability to change the culture and the environment of a football team. It's rare. You got Joe Burrow in Cincinnati. You got Peyton Manning in Indianapolis. It's just an individual that can walk into a building and he can change the environment that he's in. And that is incredibly difficult when you don't have the skill position players. And that's where they're lacking right now. They don't have the draft picks. They don't have the money. I don't know if any coach worth his merit really wants to go there because of the ownership.
Probably not.
Somebody's going to take it because they're going to get paid, generational wealth. And so it's a tough spot. It was tough sledding. I think C.J. Stroud probably is thanking his lucky stars that he wasn't the first overall pick a year ago.
If I said to David Tepper, you could redo number 1 overall pick.
Well,
100%. I mean, there's no way anybody, even a Panthers fan, could sit back and say, I like what I saw from Bryce Young. I'm willing to say, yeah, we would take him over C.J. Stroud. I mean, here's a question, and I just kind of thought about this. Let me know in the comments below. If the draft happens again, where does C.J. Stroud go? Does he go top 10? After what you know, after what you saw in the first year, is he a first-round pick? That sounds crazy, but I think you can make a real argument that he's probably not. If you just take the rookie season, you could go back, you could redo it. Who takes him? Does he go over like Aiden O'Connell? Does he go over some of those guys? Like where does he fall? I can tell you where he doesn't fall. He does not fall first overall. Speaking of first overall, let's take a look at Bryce's rookie season compared to Jamarcus's rookie season. Now, this is not a perfectly clean comparison. Jamarcus didn't really play his first actual season. He played 15 games in his second season. Obviously, Bryce played 17 games in his first season, or 16 games in his first season. So it's not a tried and true perfect comparison, but it's pretty close. Okay, 15 games the year after he was drafted, and then 16 games Bryce's first. So let's take a look. So Bryce Young goes 2-14, 59.8% completion percentage. Jamarcus goes 5-10 with a 53.8 completion percentage. So Bryce's completion percentage was a little bit better. Jamarcus throws for 24-23 with one less game. Bryce throws for 28-77. So a few more yards if you give Jamarcus one other game. You know, if Jamarcus throws for 160, 200 yards, somewhere in there, he's at that like 2,600. So pretty similar. Touchdown, interception. Bryce has 11 touchdowns, 10 picks. Jamarcus has 13 touchdowns, 8 picks. So Jamarcus had a better touchdown interception ratio. He also threw for more touchdowns, less picks. If we go to some QBR and rating-wise, Jamarcus was a 77.1. Bryce was a 73.7. So Jamarcus had a better passer rating than Bryce Young, which is hard to even imagine. QBR, which wasn't around. Well, it was just created when Jamarcus got drafted. QBR, Bryce was 33.3, and Jamarcus was 29.2. So Bryce was a little bit better on QBR. Some advanced metrics, air yards and attempt. Let's see here. Let's go yards per attempt. Jamarcus yards an attempt was 6.6. Bryce was 5.5, so Jamarcus was pushing it down a little further. Yards per completion, when Bryce was 9.1, Jamarcus was 12.2, so much further there. So if you look at these two seasons, even if you can't say one is better than the other, and I think they're pretty similar. I think they're kind of right there. You can't unequivocally say Jamarcus had a better season. You can't really say Bryce had a better season. The whole point is that they're kind of the same. Like, Bryce Young didn't just have a bad season. He had a historically bad season. He had the kind of season that people still talk about with Jamarcus Russell. Jamarcus Russell, people forget this. I played blackjack with Jamarcus Russell at the Golden Nugget in Biloxi. People still talk about Jamarcus Russell and how bad he was. That's the level that we just saw from Bryce Young. And we know the stories with Jamarcus. We know the stories of he wasn't watching tape, he wasn't going to practice, he wasn't training, he was putting on weight, he was doing extracurricular stuff. We've heard all that. We're assuming Bryce Young's not doing that. Bryce Young, we haven't heard anything about him not watching tape, him not going to practice, him doing extracurriculars. So that kind of makes it almost worse. If you just look at these 2 years, because I think if you went back and you said, after Bryce Young's first 15 games, if you went back and said, hey, would you draft Jamarcus Russell in the top 10? No one would take him in the top 10 after seeing these 15 games. If you said you want to take him in the first round, no one would take him in the first round, right? So even though it sounds crazy, that's kind of where Bryce Young is. We're kind of in the same ballpark with this level of play.
I think that from what I heard from it, it was his influence on Bryce Young.
But let's say I said this to him privately. Publicly, he can't say, well,
No.
I'd take C.J. Stroud. But if I said you could redo this.
I have a question about that.
Okay.
I have a question around whether C.J. Stroud in that Carolina Panthers uniform is any better than what Bryce Young has been this year.
That's fair.
I don't know. I just don't know about that. I'm not saying that Stroud would have for sure led Carolina to a divisional championship and led them to the playoffs and all that. I don't think it would have been that case, but I just don't see how you can watch the two, watch Stroud and watch Young, and how you can sit there and say that there's even a debate. Strictly how they play, how they look, physically how they throw the ball, all of that, the maturity level in the pocket. CJ Stroud's on a different level than Bryce Young. And barring you just being the biggest Bryce Young fan there is, or a huge Carolina Panthers fan, it's hard for me to imagine anyone couldn't just agree and say, yeah, no doubt about it. They messed up. We saw Anthony Richardson for 4 games. I would take him over Bryce Young for sure. And those couple of games, I saw enough to where I think, okay, he might be able to physically do this. I didn't see an iota of that through the first season of Bryce Young.
The team aspect of things, I understand the quarterback gets so much of the recognition, both good and both bad, when things go right or wrong. But it is a team game. It is the ultimate team game. If all 11 aren't functioning on the same level every single week, it's not going to be successful. And everything gets laid at the feet of the quarterback. I really have a problem with the idea that if you put C.J. Stroud in Carolina, they would be they'd be vying for the playoffs in the NFC South right now.
Yeah, but we're making the Texans roster sound like it's a lot better than what it is.
The offensive line was incredibly good to start the season.
Yeah, but the skilled position, if I said they got Dalton Schultz, nobody's going, yes. And even some of these other receivers that kind of came out of nowhere.
This is some very polite pushback from Dan. This is Dan saying, come on. You're acting like the Houston Texans are this perfect situation. They were awful. They were picking right up there. They were picking, 2 and 3? So it's not like the Houston Texans were a quarterback away. Davis Mills wasn't doing this. So I understand that Houston looks much better now, but you got to remember, going all the way back, Houston was seemingly just as big of a mess as Carolina. So I do think it's kind of diminishing C.J. Stroud's impact. Ryan Leaf is diminishing C.J. Stroud's impact to say that, well, he's just in a good situation. How good of a situation actually is the Texans, or how good of a situation was the Texans when Stroud first got there?
I don't know if, it wasn't like it's a Tyreek Hill and
right.
The Chiefs. Tank was wonderful. He got in. Nobody knew him.
Yeah.
Anybody who
Would Tank Dell and Nico Collins would they have had as good of a year if they were in Carolina? I would say no.
was down in Houston knew him, but because he went to the university there. I think that C.J. Stroud makes players better. I think
Who was a better quarterback?
I had C.J. Stroud, as you know, going into the draft as my number one guy. That was far and away. I thought there was a sizable difference between the two. I thought the size was the big difference for Bryce Young in terms of what he looked like in comparison to Kyler Murray, because Kyler was such a stout guy down.
Kyler's a totally different player. Like, Kyler is a big guy for how short he is. And Kyler also is one of the fastest, most agile quarterbacks we've ever seen. Fastest as far as like quick movements. Oh, and Kyler has an absolute cannon. Like, Kyler, for what it's worth, he's a short guy, but he's got a laser. He's incredibly shifty. Kyler's a totally different animal. Bryce Young had the stature issues of Kyler Murray without the cannon, without the shiftiness, without the agility. He didn't have any of that. The fact of the matter is, no quarterback of Bryce Young's size has ever really succeeded in the NFL. I think Doug Flutie is the most successful if you look at just the size comparisons. And I'm not totally sure that's who Bryce Young wants to be compared to.
Downstairs, his baseball background, and just the size was going to give Bryce Young a problem unless you had an offense that really was structured around him, and then you go and fire the guy that you brought in to do that and his quarterback coach, midway through the year. So, I mean, it's been exactly how first overall picks sometimes when they go to bad teams end up. New coach, all the things, new offensive coordinator, all the things that go with that. And unfortunately, it's going to be tied to C.J. Stroud's success. If they were to win this weekend and go to the playoffs, boy, that's even a bigger insult to.
Oh, this is before. Okay, so I wasn't sure when this was recorded. So this was before the Colts-Texans game where Stroud does win. Stroud looks fantastic, and they do win the division. So that makes sense that he's not mentioning all of that. But, I hate to just kind of put a no doubt about it stamp guarantee on this, but with certain players and coaches, I think you can just take a look at it and say, we got this one wrong. You can take a look at it and say, this player doesn't have it. Bryce Young, from where I'm sitting, doesn't have it. If you could do a redraft, I have a hard time imagining he goes in the first round. I'd be very surprised if he went in the first round. We'll see how he does in year 2. We'll see if there's a dramatic improvement. But if there's not a dramatic improvement, let's just say there's a slight improvement. And usually quarterbacks take a step backwards in their sophomore year because there's more game tape on them. We all know the stories. So usually the sophomore year is the worst year for a quarterback. Usually their rookie year is pretty good because no one has tape on them. No one knows how they're going to be. So if Bryce takes a step backwards, and then I think for sure he will go down as the worst first overall draft pick, draft bust quarterback we will have ever seen. But even if he improves a little bit, that's just not the level of a starting quarterback in the NFL. If Carolina had the first overall pick this year, it'd be really interesting because I think they would draft Caleb Williams. And then it's like, what do you do with Bryce Young? I'm not even sure you could trade Bryce Young right now. Even though we've seen 17 games of Bryce Young, he's in that like Trey Lance territory where people don't think he can play and there's just no value in trading for him. So, and I know this sounds bad for Panthers fans, but tough situation. And Ryan Leaf's right too. Like, that's not exactly a coach destination with the draft picks that were given up to get Bryce Young, the Tepper ownership issues. Seems like he wants to be this kind of domineering owner. Frank Reich has not been kind talking about the Tepper relationship. So really tough. But let me know in the comments below what you think. Do you think Bryce Young is a bust? Do you think he can turn it around? How good do you think he can be? What's his ceiling? Let me know in the comments below. Thank you for watching. I will see you in the next video.